Hi, in this recording I'd like to talk about spiritual darkness, which is something that's troubled me several times during my life and something which has troubled us all at times, I'm sure, whether we call it by the same name or not. Um, and it has to do, I feel, with this idea of suffering, which is a big idea, obviously something that has confounded believers and non-believers for millennia, probably. So I'm not going to attempt to get into and answer the question of why there is suffering in the world, but I'll tell you of my experience with spiritual darkness, with this element of suffering, if you like, and how this, in fact, has led me to grow throughout my life. So, my first experience of spiritual darkness happened when I was around the age of 10 or 11. And now, up until this time, I'd have what I would, I was fortunate to have had a very stable childhood, really. Very loved by my parents, um, and very secure in terms of what they taught me, and my mum in particular, about religion, spirituality. So I'd had this foundation, I suppose, of belief, of trust in God, in the idea of an afterlife, through my experiences, particularly with my mum as a young child. And now at this age, I suppose I was just getting to the stage where lots of us question things in our childhood. And on this particular night, when I was, unfortunately, I can't remember exactly when it was, but around 10 or 11, probably 11, I was lying in bed and pondering over the question of life and death. And my dad walked past, came to say goodnight, and I asked him what he really thinks happens when we die. And his answer, a very honest answer, was these words, which are, nobody really knows. And those simple words, which he obviously didn't intend to have any harmful impact, sent me into a great spiral of fears and doubts that actually lasted many months. It was a very intense time for me, and you'd probably call it an existential crisis. Uh, but out of this spiritual darkness, came some goodness and light, absolutely. So, firstly, it set me on a path of wanting to discover more about religions, about spirituality, maybe interested in those things. So I wasn't just, I stopped being this child who has to go to church and finds it a bit boring, or listens to Bible stories in school and wants to get out and play. um, and instead started taking this element of life a bit more seriously, and thinking into it a bit more, which has been something that I've never lost, really. Turned me into a spiritual seeker. So that was one benefit that came from my spiritual darkness at this time. But I also think, and I've had this experience since, that when we're in that vulnerable place, it's almost not quite like being at rock bottom, but you're in a place where you sort of disregard your your fundamental beliefs and attitudes about life, almost. When you're in that vulnerable, abased condition, I think we can be more open to spiritual connection, and that's something I certainly found at this time. And one example that has sprung to mind talking about this is one Christmas Eve. There are probably just a few months after this spiritual darkness period commenced. I went to the local church with my mum for a Christmas Eve service. It was actually the one church service previously in my childhood which did actually give me a bit of a warm feeling. inside, because there's something special about church at Christmas, I feel, whatever your religious beliefs. But on this particular Christmas Eve, there was a disabled person in the church, and I think at some stage we went up to the front to partake in some kind of prayer. I don't think it's communion, but yeah, some activity as part of the service when we got up off our feet, and this disabled person came to the front and did the same as the rest of us. He was in a wheelchair, I remember, and it sounds naive now, but something about watching him. I'm sure he was. I didn't know anything about his background. I'm sure he was he could well have been a very happy person, but it really, this compassion for him really struck me, and I don't think it really matters what the situation was, where this compassion struck me, but it was a catalyst that took me into an almost transcendental state, really, and I ended up with tears just flowing out of me with this compassion. And I remember my mum sitting in her car, her little Mini, afterwards, ready to go home, and just crying my eyes out and not being able to explain to her what I was feeling. She was very good. She understood, I think. It kind of went beyond words as well, what I was feeling. But I feel that part of the reason for that state that I found at this time, that I connected with, was this spiritual darkness I'd been in, this vulnerability, this sort of, yeah, I like this idea. It only come to me as I'm speaking this now, of being abased, of giving up all your former beliefs about things, of being more open in that sense. So that was a special experience. And it's interesting because I think, so I say 10 or 11 in terms of my age at this time. I think I was probably 11, and that's because I think I'd just started secondary school, because I think these experiences, the spiritual darkness experiences, have come to me in my life at times of great change, of big life shifts. So one of these was starting secondary school, moving from a small sort of almost village type primary school where everybody knew everyone else, to this big environment, where essentially you're not known, at least for several years. And this takes me to my next big spiritual darkness experience, which was during another big life shift, and that was when I first started university, some 20 years ago now. And this was obviously a big change for me. I remember feeling quite unsettled in those first few months. It wasn't until about my second year that I really felt almost at home there, and since then I've got used to being at home and in various different places. But until then, until going to university, I just had my home with my mum and dad, brother and sister older, so they weren't at home so much. So it's a big shift in terms of security for me. And I had another one of these spiritual darkness experiences, and it came from a very offhand comment from a friend, much like the comment from my dad for the first experience. He's a good friend, still in touch these days, and I never actually told him about how his comment affected me. Maybe I will one day. But we were having a chat. I think it was after seeing the film The Others, about ghosts and spirits and things like that, and he told me that he thinks there's probably not an afterlife, because he's had operations, surgery under general anaesthetic, and when they put the mask on you, there's nothing, and then you wake up, and that time that's passed while you've been under anaesthetic, it doesn't exist for you. And he said that's what he thinks death might be like, and that was the first time I'd really grasped that, I think, because there was a part of me, maybe a naive part of me, maybe it was a part of me in touch with some truth that thought that just simply can't happen. Your consciousness can't stop. That can't be what happens when we die. But then when my friend made that analogy, that's when I thought, oh yeah, I can actually see that. And this deeply troubled me. And again, it was a period of a few months, maybe more, maybe several months actually, of feeling these depths of despair and fear, and again, something that you'd probably class as an existential crisis. But this experience brought huge positive shifts in me that are still developing, still ongoing today, and it changed me so much, really, in my thoughts about religion and spirituality, and I'm so grateful actually for the experience now. Firstly, I had my first laptop at this time, and that was a bit of a novelty, being able to Google things, and not that I hadn't done that before, but just having the freedom of doing it in my own room, room in the halls of residence. And I just got searching for spiritual truth through the internet. I mean, I know now there are possibly better places to go for it, possibly for some people, and me, a lot of the time it is still the best place to go. But what I'm saying is, we can find these things internally, um, in maybe a stronger sense than surfing the net. But anyway, what I found from my searching was, well, a lot of quite inspirational stuff, but one that stands out was finding the works of a person called Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, he was a 18th century, initially scientist, philosopher, and he became a mystic later in life when he had a series of, actually, sort of, from what I understand, they were sort of almost ongoing near-death experiences. So he wasn't near death, but he was in this transcendental state, and making connections with other places within himself and beyond. And it was sort of fundamentally a Christian philosophy that he came out of this with, but it was a Christian philosophy that I would say takes all of the love and acceptance and lots of the teachings of Jesus, if we look into those, and a bit less of the hell and damnation side of things, which is what I'd had trouble with over the last few years leading up to this. I never really bought the idea of salvation being something that you achieve by uttering the right sort of prayer. I mean, I know there's much more to it than that, but I also know that some Christians do believe in that sort of very very strict salvation, where you have to not only believe but believe in exactly the right way and say the right things. But this was another extreme to that, and Emanuel Swedenborg, what he brought back from his experiences was that it's up to us what happens to us. We guide our paths both on earth and in the afterlife. And basically, if it sort of makes very clear logical sense. If you're a good person and you care about others, then you're going to want to continue being that way in the afterlife. And it's only people who have very selfish desires, who might have more of an unpleasant experience. Even then, I'd go so far as to say that I feel that in that case, God would do everything possible to bring that person round. And perhaps that's where reincarnation and numerous other spiritual experiences that we probably have very little understanding of now can come into play. But anyway, Emanuel Swedenborg, absolutely somebody who I would recommend looking into. Huge influence on my life, and gave me, I think ultimately gave me a bit of trust that this belief that I'd held deep down, whereby to get to heaven, to have a positive afterlife, we simply have to love. And it doesn't matter what religion we belong to, who we believe in. If we have that love in our lives, then in the life to come, things are going to be okay. So that was a really nice experience, learning about this person. And similar to my initial experience of spiritual darkness, I absolutely found during this period, this first year of university, that my darkness at that time and the vulnerability that came with that opened me up to these more transcendental like experiences, and one of which I remember was when I was coming out of a lecture, coming out onto the street, and I saw that the sun was shining, and it was just a really nice morning, and I had been listening to some positive, inspirational type music, and one of them was Louis Armstrong's Wonderful World, and in my head, with this lovely scene in front of me, I started singing I see trees are green, and at exactly the right moment, at just the right timing, after I sang those lines in my head, I heard a shout of "Red Roses," which of course is the next line of the song, and it turned out that further down the street, there was a person selling red roses. It must have been Valentine's Day, or so close to Valentine's Day, and a skeptic would say it was a coincidence, but for me, in that moment, I suddenly totally believed. And there was a part of me that knew that this was something special, some sort of message, some sort of connection. And I remember walking to my next lecture and seeing all my peers gathered outside the lecture hall outside, and this sort of, I think it was sort of a rainy, sunny day, kind of the type of day when a rainbow might come out, and just looking at them, people, and thinking, wow, they're all pieces of God, and just having this really clear sense that was true, and knowing that for the first time in my life, truly, which was amazing, because I don't. Swedenborg, for all the great things that I learned from him, I'm not sure how much he goes into the idea of us being pieces of God, which is something I've come across more in recent years from sources like the Course in Miracles, which is another thing I'd very much recommend. But yeah, having this insight that we're all pieces of God, that these people I was seeing were little slices of God, if you like. It's interesting that came from somewhere in me, and it sort of suggests to me that we all have this knowing inside us. But anyway, that was an amazing experience, and I just think that vulnerability I was feeling at the time made me open, susceptible to that experience. So I've hopefully showed how these spiritual darkness experiences I've had can bring positivity, can bring change for the better, can bring us closer to God. And I have had other experiences like this, mostly not as intense. For example, in recent years, with my young sons had time in hospital, health conditions. That has been a spiritual darkness in a slightly different way, but it's something I'll talk about at some stage, because I've certainly done some growing through that experience, and that's changed me a lot. And I suppose I just want to say that, coming on to the bigger question of suffering, bad things happening, that sort of idea, spiritual darkness being one. And why does that happen? I know I said I wasn't going to answer this question, and it's a big one. I mean, it's a difficult one, but in my experience, these times have ultimately brought me closer to God, but have brought me more connection rather than further away. So, and I don't think that and this is something a conclusion I've come to recently. I don't think we have to have these bad experiences. That's another possibly quite important thing. I think we can shortcut it if we take the shorter path, the right path initially. But at times when we're maybe going down the wrong route, or we're maybe distracted by things, perhaps that's this Christian idea of the Holy Spirit, perhaps getting us back on track through using these bad experiences to get us back on track is what happens. And perhaps that's a common thing, that these spiritual darkness experiences for other people give opportunities for growth, at least. So thank you for listening, and I will record more shortly, I'm sure, and I'll record as things come to me. That's how I've decided to do this for now. This idea came to me today of doing this recording, and I've mainly ad-libbed, had a few little notes written down, but I just want it to be from the heart as much as possible. So thank you again.